is the conclusion. So any research for that matter, it must first observe. It observes. Like say, let us say you want to study maybe the behavior of the students, maybe that in an afternoon class as compared to a morning class. What first you do is you try to observe them. You try to observe them. How do they behave in the morning? How do they behave in the afternoon? How do they behave? It's a kind of early morning class or evening class and so on. First you observe. Then you try to kind of do some kind of hypothesis. Hypothesis is a statement, the validity of which needs to be tested. It's a tentative statement, the validity of which needs to be tested. So you try to form some kind of an hypothesis as to why they take so much of interest in the morning, and why do they kind of do not take so much of interest in the afternoon class. Is it because they go off to sleep, or is it because they get tired, or is it because actually that they're very eager to go and play? So there could be any kind of guesswork that you do is a hypothesis. The validity of which needs to be tested, because a hypothesis gives you some kind of a direction for research. And please mind you, it is objective and very logical. Any research for that matter must be and logic behind whatever you do. And it is the ability of the researcher to find that kind of a logic. So unless a researcher is competent to be very logical, very kind of there is what is called a systemic thinking is what is really required in research. And it applies all the possible tests to validate the data. Please mind you that one of the true tests of research is the validation. Whatever you speak in research, there must be supported by a valid evidence. Because they say there must be objectivity in research. If you ask me what is objectivity, somebody gave a very fine definition of objectivity in research. It says ability and willingness to examine evidence dispassionately. I repeat again, objectivity in research means ability and willingness to examine evidence dispassionately. That means without any subjectivity, you're going to kind of arrive at some kind of findings. So it's your ability and willingness to examine the evidence. That is, you're trying to look at the evidence and then conclude, not by your own personal preferences, whims and fancies. So it's based upon observable experience. Please mind you that research must always be based on an observable experience. That means when you explain a phenomenon, you should be able to observe that kind of phenomenon. That means there must be evidence of that observation. If you say, no, that I found out that it is this kind of a phenomenon, this kind of an explanation, but if somebody asks you, please show me, how do I observe that? If you say, no, only I am able to see, it does not again become research. It should be generally observable experience and answers pertinent questions. So please mind you, any research is a very focused activity. That means you're not going to take up anything and everything. You take small little. As research by definition, it says, knowing more and more about very less and less is research. Knowing more and more about very less and less is research. I mean, you should take a very minute aspect in any kind of a body of knowledge, work on that and master that, and you should be able to kind of say with authority, this is what the findings of the research is. You take a very big project and simply go on the surface, it does not become research. That's what it meant. And it provides solutions to the problem. And please mind you, it's a very exhaustive investigation. Well, having known the characteristics of research, we then move on to what is the purpose of research. Please mind you, the very purpose of any research for that matter is to familiarity with the phenomenon. That means if a phenomenon is occurring in your day-to-day life or in a country's day-to-day life, it is repeating. And so you want to become very familiar as to why such a phenomenon occurs. For instance, that we are caught with COVID. Maybe that the epidemic you saw that it was really kind of created such a kind of havoc. But we were really surprised. Nobody had any kind of a research on this virus, nor did we have any kind of a vaccine for this. And we had to get familiar with this phenomenon. So many researches were conducted, so many medicines really came out, so many, at least, maybe scientific, at least, investigations were conducted. And now we are very, very familiar with this kind of virus to a certain extent, if not fully. So familiarity with the phenomenon is what really is research, is the purpose of research, and it should show new insights into the issue. The purpose of research is not only to explain what it is, it also should explain that what are the new facets. For instance, taking the COVID itself as the issue, there are new, at least, versions of this COVID, at least, is coming up. So your investigation should also not only explain what is COVID, but also kind of other types of viruses. Why such mutations happen? All this must be very clearly explained by your research, and only then that the future possibilities are also identified in research. And it must describe accurately as much as possible, because if you say that only there's a 20% possibility, 60% possibility, it does not really become research. It must be accurately weigh what is really required. Like, say, if you want to do some research on maybe the status of poverty among Indian rural people, you must be able to get exact, at least, a picture of why the poverty exists, what is the level of poverty and all this, and not merely get some kind of an idea at a very superficial level. And determine the frequency. It also must say how frequently this phenomenon is occurring, how frequently a particular phenomenon is occurring. That must also be kind of stated. Not only say it is occurring, but it should also say how often it occurs. And it's a problem. The whole purpose is to solve the problem and also pinpoint what are the other related issues. And you should be able to test a hypothesis in a research. That means you must be able to use some kind of tools in order to kind of test your hypothesis, either nullify it or accept it. And it finds current trends. The purpose of research also to explain what are the possible trends coming up, at least in the near future, so that you can make some kind of decision. That means you should be able to extrapolate and interpolate the facts that are going to kind of come through, at least in the future, so that you can, using your foresight, you can have some kind of strategy to accept or say offset such uncertainties. And it also finds change in the pattern. Well, having at least discussed about what are the characteristics of the research and what is the purpose, let us move on. What are the types of research that one can talk about? There are different types of research. One is what is called a descriptive research, whereby it only describes the attributes. It describes the attributes. It may not quantify. It only describes, qualitative description of all the possible things that may happen as a result of a particular phenomenon is what descriptive research is all about. In exploratory research, you're trying to explore an unexplored area. You're trying to explore. Maybe somebody has not gone there at all. You have not even seen that kind of a place or that kind of a phenomenon. You're trying to explore a new, at least, maybe that, problem area or an issue. So it is the first time. It's an untrodden, at least, path. And you're only the kind of first person to go and find out what it is all about. For instance, that, when kind of, the Tenzing went up at the Himalayas, he found it. At least these are the things. So the first time that, maybe or whatever, he was one of the first maybe to go there and find out what it was. Yeah. Then predicting. In the case of predictive research, it predicts actually. That is, it predicts as to what is going to be the weather. What is going to be weather at least tomorrow? What's going to be weather in the next month? What's going to be weather in a particular month? It predicts. Or it's going to predict what's going to be the sales in the month of January, sales in the month of February. Or it also predicts what's going to be the GDP of the country in the near to come. Or it predicts what's going to be the outcome of practicing a particular kind of a culture over a period of time. So predictive research is, it predicts what's going to be the possibilities in the future to come. Then, for instance, the allied, again, applied research. The next method is the applied research. Here, what is important is how do we kind of apply certain kind of theories that are already, or models that have already been developed, and apply it to a certain situation and see what's going to be the outcome of such research. So applied research is a theoretical or modular concepts are applied in order to derive certain results. In a comparative research, you're comparing two periods of time. Maybe that you're making a comparison between pre-Mughal and post-Mughal era, or pre-COVID era, post-COVID era. You're drawing certain kind of comparisons with certain thing in mind. Maybe either regarding a development or regarding education, or what was the knowledge level of these students before COVID or post-COVID. Comparative studies that you can conduct becomes comparative research. Then there's also what is called as fundamental research. Another type of research is the fundamental research. In the case of fundamental research, you're trying to evolve a theory itself. You're trying to formulate a model or a theory, or constructing some theory. See, there are already so many theories which are already conducted either in management or in economics, or you talk about maybe a Giffin's paradox is some kind of a concept somebody has evolved. So that is the most very kind of a fundamental research somebody has done, and they have arrived at some kind of a conclusion. So that becomes very fundamental research. And a quantitative research. The research can be both quantitative. In the case of a quantitative research, please mind you, it uses a lot of at least numerical analysis based on the data, and it arrives at some kind of it can be quantified. Whatever can be quantified, because all research cannot be quantified. There is some research which cannot be quantified, can only be qualified. So such a quantification exists when there is a numerical analysis of all the kind of related facts and figures, so you quantify the data. In the case of qualitative research, there are certain issues. Let us say you want to analyze the performance of a public relations officer in a company. It's only qualitative judgment. You can't say he has met 100 people, customers, and solved their problem and things like that, or he has met some 100 media people and he has enhanced the image of the company. It's more qualitative. So that's qualitative research again. Then conceptual research is you're trying to evolve a concept. For instance, let us say that there is maybe that concept called as globalization, that which is when you try to kind of be at least think global and act local. That's a concept of globalization. That means you're taking also the global issues and also applying to the local situation. So that's the new conceptual, at least framework that you have really developed. So it becomes a very conceptual research. So having understood what is the research, at least characteristics, what are the types of research, and what is the purpose of research, we move on to what is the research process, that how you have to do. Even if you're a first timer in research, even if you're a kind of beginner of research, please, you have to very carefully understand this research process. As we have already understood through the meaning of research that it answers unanswered questions, it answers or maybe finds solutions to the unanswered problems. So a research process basically begins with selection and identification of a research problem. As I've been very repeatedly telling, there is no problem, no research, because you cannot reinvent the wheel. The wheel is already there. Somebody has already invented the wheel. If you're going to say I'm going to reinvent the wheel, it's not research. You are going to kind of talk about what others have already kind of done. So basically, that if there is no problem, there is no research at all. So you should be able to identify some problem and only then work on that. It becomes research. So therefore, the very first step is the selection and identification of the research problem. So to do research, please mind you, you should have a problem on hand. How are you going to have, so what do you mean by a problem again? A problem is not necessarily a typical problem. It is an area of concern which is unanswered so far, or area of a problem which is not solved so far. It can be any area. It can be in your own home front. It can be your own business. It can be to your own institution. It can be your own country. It can be your own economy. It can be your own kind of, maybe practices. It can be your own religion. It can be your own kind of, maybe that the practices that you kind of evolved. It is your own behavior. It can be your own income. It can be anything. So first you must identify, as a beginner of research, please mind you, how to identify a problem is, until and unless you are a very good reader, unless you are a very ferocious reader, that you will not be able to identify any problem at all. So if you look around in your own subject area, if you are looking at, let us say maybe that the business or management is your subject. Well, if you've been reading a lot of newspapers, journals, books, and so on, somewhere you come across some kind of a problem for which you have not found some kind of solution. Maybe, for instance, if you're a business, at least from the background, during the, at least COVID itself, that there are a lot of supply. Supply was not kind of curtailed. There was supply. Prices one side, prices also did not even increase. In fact, a lot of discounts and so many things were offered. People were not really buying. The whole problem during that, any recession, it's a situation of a recession. At that point of time, people have a lot of money. It's not that people did not have money. People have the money, but they're not willing to spend. This is more to do with behavioral economics. People have the money, goods are available, but nobody is willing to buy because there's some kind of a chaos in the market. The very mental equilibrium of the consumer is very disturbed. So he is unable to act and take any kind of wide decision and move towards purchase. So that's a very tricky situation. Very sound ground for doing some kind of research as to during such pandemic, how do these consumers react? What is their purchasing behavior? What is their attitude towards the market? What is their attitude towards the pricing policy? What is their attitude towards the supply? What is their attitude towards the promotional policies and so on? Or for instance, that now you're an economist, that there are so many areas of economics that maybe it can be developmental economics, or talking about poverty economics or international economics, whatever. You can kind of maybe that, and in that itself you can at least arrive at some kind of problem. Maybe that when you're talking about kind of economics itself, that you're looking at maybe that did the poverty level of people increase or decrease during the pandemic, for that matter. Or maybe that you're a psychologist, you're trying to make a comparison between intelligence level and behavior of students during the pre-pandemic and post-pandemic. Or you're a sociology kind of researcher, maybe you're trying to understand the impact of culture, traditions, and so on, maybe during at least this COVID itself. I'm just giving an example of COVID, but there can be many more things that you can kind of really work on. And so first you must have a research problem in hand. And this problem, please mind you, can be identified only if you are being a very good reader. You've been reading some newspapers, journals, you're discussing in some seminars, conferences, and so on. And please mind you, identify a problem which is very dearer in a subject that is very dearer to you. It becomes very easy for you to conduct research. How do you do this identification and research of problem? That anyway, in the second part, we are going to deal with how to select a problem. I'll come to that later. The second step in research is a review of related literature. Well, that if you want to kind of work in some area such as say poverty area itself, so you have to kind of go through the literature. What is the current state of research on poverty, at least so far? So once you have at least gone through the literature, several articles, several books, several reports, and so on, you'll be able to identify some problem area with regard to, let's say, a poverty itself, issue itself. So then, once you review the literature, then you will arrive at certain issues which are still not answered, and then you bring it to the form statement of a problem. So having done some research, we'll go into the details of this problem statement and all that later. The next step is to state the exact problem. Prepare a statement of the problem, that India is a country which has several plans and developmental at least schemes. In spite of that, we have lived. There are many people who have lived below the poverty line and whatever, and still there are needs for some kind of research to answer certain unanswered questions. So, or maybe that during maybe that when this government took over, that maybe you're trying to understand the impact of maybe the currency issue itself. So the currency, regarding the currency, the purpose of the currency issue was to ensure that the black money at least is unearthed, and also they wanted to bring back the Swiss money and whatever. At least there were several issues which were kind of raised, and whether you can do a research on what was the impact of such at least currency policy. So the next one is that so you try to kind of understand a problem and try to work on that particular problem. So the statement of the problem. So demonetization, what I was talking about, what is its impact ultimately on different sectors of the economy? Maybe you talk about the financial state of the country, the GDP of the country, talk about on the industrial development of the country, or the purchasing power of people, whatever. You try to identify a problem and try to work on it. Then, once you have identified some kind of a problem area, the next thing is you must develop certain objectives for your research. So try to develop